Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you wholeheartedly to another episode of Countdown to Eternity, but this is going to be one of the special ones because Jerusalem is quite literally, I don't even know what to say, Don. I mean, I don't know where we start. You can tell by now, Jerusalem will be the subject of today's Countdown to Eternity. I am here with the great Don Stewart, and I am looking forward to this one because Jerusalem, Israel, and everything else around is in upheaval, and we've got a lot going on. So, hello, Don. Glad to have you. Let's get right into it, shall we?
Okay, of all days today in the Israeli calendar is Jerusalem Day. Remember marking the day in 1967, June 6th on our calendar, where Jerusalem was liberated by the Israelis. They captured the Temple Mount, East Jerusalem, and it's been under their control ever since June of 1967. Again, in the Israeli calendar, it was today, and today of all days. This is the worst attack on Jerusalem since 2014, maybe even going to be worse. Sirens going off, rocket hits house, major escalation as Hamas fires at Israeli capital. The latest, and just to let people know, we're recording at 2:28 in the afternoon Pacific time on Monday. So this is live. We're giving live comment right now. And so things will obviously change by the time you hear this on Wednesday or later. But the point is, on Jerusalem Day, James, what we have here, the day that Bible prophecy was fulfilled when the city of Jerusalem was united, literally under Israeli control for the first time, literally in at least 2,000 years, if not longer. Here we have sirens going off, rocket hits house, escalation taking place. Netanyahu says it's going to be, we're going to respond in kind, and we may have some type of regional war here before we know it. So you can't make this stuff up.
Oh my goodness. And we're watching the escalation. There are some awe-inspiring and very, very eerie videos that are out there right now of the Iron Dome system literally intercepting the hundreds of rockets that are coming in from Hamas. It's amazing to see where things are going right now. What does this all mean, Don? I mean, how do we make sense of this with respect to Bible prophecy? Because there's a lot to take in here. I've got a lot of views and ideas on this. I know that one thing I can definitely say is that we can look at a region in Israel that is more unstable than it ever has been in a long time. And we can also say that's okay because we know the end game. We know where things are going to go, and we know that we're going to find a place of marked stability before we find another place of radical instability. And this is a lot to process. So how do we handle this?
No, it's a great question, James, because we're right in the midst of this. We don't know how far it's going to go. Here's what we do know. Benjamin Netanyahu said Gaza terrorists have crossed red lines with Jerusalem rockets. He said Israel is going to respond with great force, and the current confrontation could continue for some time. Now, what's interesting, too, we not only have all this going on, this is like the worst attack, first time since a rockets hit them since 2014. But right now, supposedly today, if not tomorrow, there are supposedly going to be, James, this I don't know whether to laugh or cry, a new government coming in, a
That's right.
left-wing government coming in Israel, although the right wing, they shot themselves in the foot. They've get something like 60% of the vote, but since they're fighting with each other and squabbling, they cannot cobble some type of coalition together. And now some from the right are getting together with an Islamic party, some from the left. And theoretically, there was supposed to be now it's been put back a bit, a new government as early as tomorrow. Can you imagine changing governments at a time like this?
Ugh. No, especially with the kind of strong leadership that Netanyahu has shown, at least militaristically speaking, that's going to be a very, very difficult process to be able to observe. And what can come of that is going to be a bit scary, at least if you're living in Israel right now. I know that there have been a lot of people that have been asking for prayer. Many of our friends in Israel have been asking for prayer. They've been noting the fact that this is probably the most unstable time that they've ever seen, not only in the government, but just basically pointing out the fact that things are escalating very, 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 very quickly. And one thing is certain, Israel isn't going to back down, right? There's not, you can even have the left-wing government form, and I can promise you they themselves are not going to back down, because even the left-wing side of Israel knows that a show of force is important if it means the preservation of the Jewish state. So even the left-wing portion of Israel is not like the left-wing portion of the United States of America, in that they want to see the destruction of the Jewish state. Our left wing politicians actually want to see the destruction of America. You don't really have that in Israel. But the problem is that without the unification necessary to be able to combat the nonsense that's beginning to happen over there, it's very difficult to see what's going to take place.
Yeah, and we don't know. It's one of these things. It's literally a moment by moment thing. Today, like we said, was Jerusalem Day, the anniversary of when the Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, was taken over. I want to say liberated by the Israelis. The festivities, one of the headlines reads, was shaken by rockets and violent riots. The Temple Mount has been the center of attention the last few days. There have been literally over 300 people injured in the clashes on the Temple Mount between the Israelis and these forces that have. What happened today, because some people wanted to come up to the Temple Mount, some Jews, for Jerusalem Day, as they always do. There were barricades set up, stones set up to throw at them, all kinds of things to stop them. And of course, you had from the United States, the State Department saying something to the effect that, the Jews got to calm it down. Israel has to calm it down. They're blaming Israel too. And remember, we talked about this last week. Biden's everybody he's had on, all of his State Department, all of his foreign policy advisors are Israel haters. He's got a whole group of people that cannot stand Israel, that are anti-Israeli. So what do you expect? And again, what's going to be bad for America, James, as we know, as you treat Israel, so goes your country.
Absolutely. And the anti Semitism that exists within the Biden administration is no small, hidden sort of an issue. We see a lot of it. It's very, very clear to us what's going on. And by the way, don't make no mistake about it. The missiles being fired by Hamas, the issues that we're beginning to see surrounding Iran, and the marked instability that's taking place, even China firing the rocket that they did irresponsibly, and of course landing where it did, and all the other nonsense that's been going on, is a direct result of the weakness in the Biden administration, the lack of willingness to show the resolve necessary to be able to have a strong hand with a big stick, to be able to defer the type of military nonsense that's beginning to take place right now. That's exactly what's going on. The United States of America, mark my words when I say this, Don, the United States of America is complicit in this. We are complicit in this action, and there will be judgment as a result. My prayer is that judgment will be deferred, or at least at the bare minimum, stopped for just a moment or two into some kind of a recession, because our administration repents and changes the direction that they're going in. But I don't think that that's going to be happening. It's one of these things that they're making a decision where they're choosing to doom the fate of the United States of America. But of course, this is not anything that surprises me, because we know how anti-American many of these people are, and they'll do anything that will endanger the United States of America. They could care less about the health and the safety and the well-being of the citizens of the United States of America. And because of that, they continue to take their stand against all things which represent good rather than evil.
Yeah, James, you are Egyptian. Your family, your
Yep.
grandfather, father, mother, they're all born in Egypt. You know the Muslim mind. Please explain to the people how two things here. Muslims play the long game, don't they? They play the long game to win in the end. And number two, they see weakness. When they see weakness, they pounce on it. They're not, when people put the olive branch out and extends that, they see it as a sign of weakness, a time they can pounce on the enemy. So please explain that to the people out there.
Yeah, so we'll talk about the long game issue in just a second, because the long game is a better. I can describe it a lot easier after I talk about the mindset of weakness that exists, because these are both very good points that you bring up, Don. They both go hand in hand, and of course you understand this because you've been to the Middle East umpteen times, probably a few times before I was even born. But
18
here's the
times.
thing that is, yeah, how many times?
18 to Israel. In 1976 was my first trip.
So the year I was born was your first trip to Israel. And it's interesting. You've got 10 trips on me, but it is interesting to think about the fact that I am first generation born into this country to a mom and dad who were born and raised in Egypt. And we come from a long line of people who have loved the Lord and spent a lot of time in Egypt, being that we're all born there. I'm not, of course, first generation born in the United States, but let me make this statement. It's very important, because I was raised speaking the language of my mother and father. I was, of course, as well raised with the culture and the understanding of what goes on especially as it relates to the Arab world and as it relates to Muslims. And one of the things you have to understand is this: it's very simple. This is not just a cultural issue as it relates to the Islamic world. This is a cultural issue that relates to anybody who is in the Middle Eastern world. You do not you do not gain respect in the Middle East if you refuse to allow yourself to be shown as somebody with strength. Oftentimes, the most common places where this ends up displaying itself is in simple representations when you're doing something as common as making a purchase, right? I can go to the Middle East right now, and if I'm an American that has no knowledge or understanding of Middle Eastern culture, and I go to somebody's business and I see within their little store a price tag, and I look at the item and purchase it because the price tag is there, I will not be respected at all by the person who sells it to me. They'll look at me and they'll say, he's a pushover, he's weak, he doesn't even have the strength to be able to be able to bargain for something like this, right? And so what happens is when I've gone to the Middle East, and this is funny, I always have at least 3 or 4 families that end up getting offended by my behavior when I'm there because they don't understand the culture. But they'll say, hey, you speak Arabic, maybe you can get us a really good deal on this item. And oftentimes it'll be a big dollar item. It'll be $1,000 item or something like that. And we go down there and basically sit down, have a cup of tea, have a cup of coffee, and get into a gnarly yelling match. I mean, because this is the way we speak in our culture. We're loud, we're boisterous. It's the way it is. And we get in a very loud yelling match, and we don't insult one another, but we certainly speak strongly with one another, and we go back and forth. And it's almost like you're brokering some kind of a national peace deal. That's the way it sounds. There's a lot of yell, loud, guttural, spitting back and forth. We're not really spitting in each other's face, but you know what I mean. We're speaking in Arabic. We're being very, very loud. And the harder you bargain, the more you tend to be respected. Now they're going to say all kinds of crazy things. You're crazy. Get out of my store. You fool. You da-da-da-da-da. But they end up respecting you. And the next time they see you around, they treat you with great respect. Why? Because in our culture, the way that we communicate with one another, we communicate strongly. We show one another the strength, internal strength that we have by making the representations that we do. And that's just the way it is. And don't get me wrong. We're respectful. We're very hospitable. We are a caring group of people. But the bottom line is that's the way it is. Now, when you take that cultural aspect and you begin to put it into the Islamic picture, you begin to recognize something very different, right? Or the issue here that begins to develop is you take the strength that I just described to you, and then you implement it within a text that fundamentally tells you, the Quran, that fundamentally tells you that the way to overcome a nation or the way to bring people into worshiping Allah is by overcoming a nation into submission. This is done by violence. This is the prerequisite. This is what it's supposed to be. Now, what it tells you is the Quran actually says, hey, listen, if you are too weak to take over a nation by violence, then you're to take over the nation by deception. You're supposed to go back and forth, and you're supposed to deceive to encourage people to basically embrace the evil that is Allah, right? And it's very interesting because there are very definitive statements that are made in the Quran regarding Allah, right? This is a very interesting thing. I'll read this to you in Arabic. This is what it says. And it's actually very ugly when you think about it. It says, وَمَكَرُوا وَمَكَرَ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَكَرِينَ, which in Arabic basically means the Jew, it's referring to the Jews at the very beginning. The Jews were deceptive and Allah was deceptive, for Allah is the chief of liars, or the chief of deceivers. So the idea here is you are to be somebody who will lie in order to be able to gain that kind of advantage. And so this is why your brilliance is coming out, Don, when you say that they believe in the long game. This isn't the kind of long game that we're talking about the Democrats believe in. This is the kind of long game that's a little bit different in that we're going to start by deceiving you. We're going to win your heart over, and then we're going to continue to build into what will end out being violent. I guess it is very similar to that of the Democratic Party. The Marxism that we're beginning to see demonstrated started through their military arm, which was the KKK, and now it's Antifa, is the same kind of a thing. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now as we look to this. And it's something that we should all be very scared of, in the sense of we need to have a healthy respect for what's going on, because eventually we'll get them by deceiving. And then once we have enough numbers, then we'll begin to take people by force. And this is ironic, considering the fact that if you are a fundamentalist of the Quran, you won't care about Black lives. Yet there's a large growing contingency of Black people that are believing Islam. Matter of fact, the Nation of Islam is funded by sheikhs in Saudi Arabia. Money is going there, yet these people who are believing and worshiping their false god, Allah, don't recognize the fact that the number one purveyor of slaves in this country are Arab Muslims, as were the number one purveyor of slaves during the time that there was slavery in this country. So this is a long game, you're right. And the problem is once it gets to the point where we get to Sharia law, we end up experiencing the kind of overwhelming force that's necessary to be able to scare people into the worship of Allah. And then before you know it, you have a nation who centers around Sharia law, who worships Allah, who was maybe once would have been a Christian nation, but is no longer, because of the fear. And then before you know it, that fear turns into a cultural mechanism that's deployed amongst people, where people are born into generation after generation of being so scared that it's a regular way of life for them. And that's exactly what's going on. And this is perhaps one of the greatest reasons why the Arabs hate the Jews, because the Jews stand everything against that, right? They literally are a shining star that speaks against all of those things. Why? Because God's ancestrally chosen people have been empowered by, inspired by, and strengthened by the true and living God. And this is why Islam is such a dangerous and divisive force against it.
Yeah, and the real problem here, James, that I see, they're doing this. Hamas is doing this with Islamic Jihad there in Gaza, is because they have this perceived weakness, and it's true that the United States of America does not have Israel's back right now. So they realize this is different in a whole new world than the last administration. So they're free to do this, when before, if they would do something like this, it would totally be to their detriment, to Iran's detriment, but not now. They see weakness in the fact that Israel seemingly is on its own, which is interesting, James. The book of Zechariah tells at the time of the end, they'll be totally on their own. So we're moving in that direction, aren't we? And the weakness that the United States is showing right now as part of the reason this is taking place today.
100%. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, literally, bro, you stole the words out of my mouth. And the direction that it's going to take Israel is going to accelerate the pace of what we read in what the Bible tells us is going to happen in the last days. I mean, it's before you know it, we're going to end up getting raptured. When that all happens, then we're going to actually see this timeline, right? And a quick correction: dead in Christ will rise, then we'll get raptured. I mean, you understand the
Yeah,
timeline, right?
of course.
But if, what's going to end up happening in essence is we're going to see the covenant strengthened by the Antichrist, right? And then that'll be the commencement of the 70th week of Daniel. Then we'll get to that point where the Antichrist, the final Antichrist, as you like to say, and I love to say now, will again set himself up in the temple, demand to be worshipped. We know Revelation 13, the mark will be deployed, and then God will deal with Israel. God will very specifically deal with Israel, and he will have already begun dealing with Israel when he defended them against the attack of the nations led by God. We'll see that will have already happened at that point. And it's just amazing to see how God, in his perfect timeline, will start to deal with the hearts of the Jews. And it's going to be pretty powerful.
Yeah, as we know right now, our Jewish friends are very scared, aren't they, James, of what's going on, and rightly so, because this is something they really haven't seen before. Jerusalem being attacked. There's no seemingly fear of Israel's reprisal. We'll see how it all plays out. But like we said, the real sad thing, the ones who are going to pay the price, are, I'm afraid, are the citizens of the United States of America, because we are the
Yep.
ones, our administration is behind this. There's no support of Israel, and there will be less and less support as this drags on. We're going to hear people say, well, look, this is the Jews. Let them take care of themselves. They got themselves into it, on and on and on. And this is going to come from the higher echelon, I believe, of the Biden administration. They're going to claim to have the back of Israel. But like we've talked about already, when you have a bunch of anti-Israel people in the administration, what do you expect but something like this? And because the Muslims realize it, here we go. Attack on all days. Jerusalem Day, the
Well,
Temple Mount's been the attack the last few weeks, or excuse me, the last few days. And so this is not unexpected, but the way it's, we don't know how it's going to end, but it's just the increase here, the snowballing effect is very, very frightening. And we need to pray for our Israeli friends.
Absolutely. And as frightening as it is, just understand this. We're not looking at Ezekiel 38 yet.
No.
We're not looking at any of the nations being players here in what we're seeing right now. As a matter of fact, I would be willing to bet, and I could be wrong, but I'd be willing to bet that some of the nations that we see listed in Ezekiel 38 that will come against Israel may even right now at this point very well stand with Israel in seeking to defend them from their terrorist attackers, because Hamas is not really acting as a proxy of any nation. Hamas is not acting as a proxy of Iran right now. That's not what's going on. Now, I know that there are some organized, very politically motivated and structurally politically motivated people that are in Lebanon that are kind of forcing all of this. I get that, right? But here's the thing. None of the nations that we read about in Ezekiel 38 are organizing this. Now, I know Turkey is getting involved. They want their piece of the action, but this is more Erdogan wanting to really, I think, position himself to being the new Ottoman leader, the new Ottoman Empire. He's just posturing a little bit because he's still looking for energy independence and so on and so forth. As all of this is still going on, he's still drilling in the Mediterranean without finding anything, even though telling everybody that he struck rich. So I think that many of these nations that we talk about are posturing themselves to get in the position to potentially do what's going to happen when God leads them to do this. But it's very interesting to understand that we're not looking at any of this yet. This is what I would call, for lack of a better term, a bit of a skirmish more than anything. And it's a scary one. Of course, it's a scary one.
Yeah, and you're right on, James. In Ezekiel 38:8, we're told Israel is taken by surprise by this attack, and part of the surprise might be of some of the people that get into it, that join with Russia, Iran, and Turkey. And so, it's something they're not really expecting at this particular time, and particularly from Russia. I think that's the key there. Russia's supposed to be the good friend. Russia's the good cop, this and that. And Russia's, try and be, and possibly here, some type of peace broker in this thing. And so Israelis will continue to trust Russia because the United States isn't around, and that's to their detriment. So we're seeing a couple things happen right now that are setting the stage of this surprise Ezekiel 38-39 attack that'll happen sometime. We don't know when. This is certainly not it. But it shows you how dicey the situation is there in the Middle East.
You ain't kidding, Don. You are not kidding. And I hate to tell you this, bro, and our audience is going to be very mad at us right now.
I know they are.
We have about a minute. We have a minute and a half left. So what say you? Give us a last word as we wrap this up. And there's a lot to talk about here. I mean, a lot to talk about. And Lord willing, I wish we could do a longer show. But anyway, now you have a minute.
Okay, got a minute. I'm seeing the clock. Yeah, okay, everybody. This is an ongoing situation. We've talked about this from day one on this program, Countdown to Eternity, that these are stories that are basically continuing stories, developing stories. And we knew something like this was going to happen. We didn't know how it's going to happen or when, but it's the further attacks on Israel, the lack of resolve by the United States, the lack of Israeli politicians trying to put a government together at this time, not realizing, this is for their own detriment. And so all these things are fitting with what the Bible says the scenario will be in the last days. And this is what's so amazing about this. God's word is right on the money here. We're seeing Israel in the center. We're seeing the nations of the world against it. Israel on its own, the stumbling stone to the world, as it were. But again, we know this, that someday, seemingly in the not too distant future, they will look up and look to him whom they have pierced and realize Jesus is their Messiah after going through a very, very tough period of the 70th week of Daniel, the time of Jacob's trouble, or the great tribulation. So the stage is being set, and only God knows what's going to happen literally in the next few days.
And make no mistake about it, these times are incredible that we're living in. And that's why we love doing this show. I mean, this is one of the things that we look forward to, is bringing you guys this insight, getting you excited about what the Bible is saying. And as Don says on a regular basis, we cannot make this stuff up. You cannot make this stuff up. It cannot even be dreamed. The writers of Ocean 11 and 12 and 13 could not put this thing together. It's pretty amazing. And so we just want to tell you guys how blessed we are to be able to do this. We do sincerely hope that you have enjoyed listening to us as much as we have enjoyed making this. We know lots of things are on the horizon in terms of God's kingdom and what's happening. So on behalf of the great Don Stewart, this is James Kaddis, and we want to welcome you and thank you for joining us for another episode of Countdown to Eternity. You guys are a blessing. We love doing this every week. God bless you.
Thanks for joining us for Countdown to Eternity with Pastors James Kaddis and Don Stewart. Hear this program by podcast wherever you like to listen to your favorite podcasts and at countdown2eternity.com. That's countdown, the number 2, eternity.com. Don Stewart has authored many books on the end times, and you can access them for free at educatingourworld.com. They include 25 Signs We Are Near the End, The Final Antichrist, Living in the Light of Eternity, God Wants Us to Know the Future, and The Rapture. Download these books and more for free at educatingourworld.com. Follow James Kaddis on Instagram and Rumble, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Calvary Chapel, Signal Hill. If you'd like to stand with us through a donation or have a question or comment you'd like to share with us, again, visit our website at countdown2eternity.com. That's all for now, but come back next week when we'll hear another prophecy update from James Kaddis and Don Stewart. Countdown to Eternity is listener supported and brought to you by Calvary Chapel, Signal Hill.